In this video, we'll be considering the preparation of an objectives and constraints statement. In a good risk management process, you'll begin by identifying a problems and opportunities statement. Given those problems and those opportunities that you've identified, the next step is to figure out, what does success look like? So in this step, identifying objectives and constraints, we will describe success. This is where you say what success would look like. You do not say what specific steps you will take to get to a successful resolution, but you identify what a successful resolution looks like. These objectives and constraints for risk management are articulated by risk managers. To identify the risk manager's goals, you need a written objectives and constraints statement. That is the desired output of this task. This statement, in broad terms, is telling people what you intend to do about the problems and opportunities you face. Again, for emphasis, it's not a specific solution, but it is a description of your general intent. The objectives and constraints should reflect the most important values in your decision-making process. In this little mini lecture, I will be speaking primarily about objectives, but please understand these ideas apply to constraints as well. Just to keep from repeating myself, I'll focus primarily on objectives. So just a moment ago, we were talking about how objectives should reflect those values that are most important in the decision-making process. So, for example, in a very general sense, these values may be related to losses, where we want to reduce or eliminate risks of loss. They could be economic values. We're trying to avoid the loss of jobs or income, profits, trying to minimize cost. Or they could be related to public values like protecting children, protecting the environment, and so on. Let's take a moment to distinguish these two concepts, objective and constraint. An objective is a statement of the intended purpose of the risk analysis. It's what you intend to do. So it is a clear statement of a desired end that risk management options are intended to accomplish. So if I could be a little bit informal, I might say an objective is a statement of how we will do good. Again, using my food safety background, preventing illnesses, promoting health would be examples of objectives. Things that we are trying to do, good that we are trying to accomplish. Notice this says nothing about how. It just says what in general we will try to do so that you can understand what success will look like. A constraint describes those things that we are trying not to do. So again, being very informal, if we live in a world where we want to do good, objectives, and avoid evil, constraints, some examples of constraints would be, we are going to do our best not to increase cost. We will do our best not to cause the loss of jobs. Where do these objectives and constraints come from? Well, ultimately you're going to see they are very closely tied to the problems and opportunity statement. But your articulation of the objectives and constraints is informed by values. And values depend on what is important to people. There are things that concern the general public. There are also things that concern the experts. And then there are things that concern our institutions, our legal institutions, and other stakeholder groups. This is where objectives and constraints come from. The success of our risk analysis process, the success of our risk management activity are defined by the objectives and constraints. These are the things that we must do. These are the things that we must not do in order to succeed. If we don't meet our goals to some extent, our risk analysis process, our risk management activity has failed. If we violate our constraints, our risk analysis process, our risk management activity has failed. Objectives and constraints define success for our risk analysis process. To identify objectives and constraints, you need to write your very first objectives and constraints statement. Ideally, in a good risk management process, this would be done on the first day of that risk management activity, and it would be done as soon as you complete your first problems and opportunities statement. With the problems and opportunities in hand, consider what you want to do in very broad terms to address these problems and the opportunities that you've identified. In doing this, you may better understand the problems and opportunities, and you might revise that problems and opportunities statement as you begin to understand your intent better. A good objective is SMART. SMART is an acronym. It stands for specific. Good objectives are clear, they're free from ambiguity, they are measurable, we can document their attainment by some objective means. They would be attainable. It can be reached at the end of a course of action in a risk management activity. They're relevant. They reflect what is important to people. And they are timely. They can be accomplished in a reasonable time frame. There are also some things that a good objective is not. It's not an absolute target. It does not specify a particular target. You would never say reduce a loss by 50%, because it might be possible to reduce the loss by more than that. A good objective is not a management option. It does not prescribe a specific course of action. You would never say our objective is to build a flood wall or a levee. It's not a government goal. Objectives are not political or governmental objectives. So freedom, liberty, all of those things are wonderful things, but they are not risk management objectives. A good objective is not a risk analysis task. Developing a dose response curve is not an objective for a risk management activity. And neither is a good objective a resource constraint. Your objectives don't address time, money, or expertise. They are all very important details, but that's part of the risk management process. It's not part of your objective set. Objectives and constraints tend to use words like these: reduce, minimize, maximize, and so on. So this would be a good starter set if you're not familiar with the language of objectives. Once again, and for emphasis, the output of this task is to develop a written objectives and constraints statement. It's a piece of paper on which you have literally written down the objectives and constraints that will guide your risk analysis process and your risk management activity. It's a statement of what you intend to do about the problems and opportunities that you face. You'll recall from the mini lecture on problems and opportunities some work that a class on food safety risk assessment did with me a year or two back. I've reproduced the list of problems that the group came up with on the left, because what I would like you to see is that in a good risk management process, every problem maps into an objective. So for example, transmission of H7N9 from poultry to humans due to eating improperly cooked or raw poultry meat from infected poultry. That's a problem. What would success look like? Reducing the number of human infections due to eating improperly cooked or raw poultry meat. That's what success would look like. The objective says nothing about how you would achieve that success. It just simply says reducing that problem, in a sense, is what a success would look like. The public fears catching H7N9 by eating poultry. An objective would be restore the public's confidence in eating poultry. Poultry sales have declined due to fear of H7N9. Our objective would be to increase poultry sales back to the level before the outbreak of H7N9. Human-to-human transmission of the flu could lead to a serious epidemic. The objective is to prevent the occurrence of human-to-human transmission of the flu. Now, you will find in food safety very often the objectives are very much a statement that says we're going to solve this problem. It's not always going to be that simple. There are other applications of the risk management activity that are going to be a little bit trickier. But you at least get the idea here that every problem, there is an objective corresponding to it. And the objective basically describes what a successful resolution of the problem would look like. Some problems might require one or more objectives. Every once in a while, you might have an objective that's not reflective of a problem. But by and large, most of the time, your decision context process will have an objective or a constraint for every problem and every opportunity. This is a part of the risk management process that many organizations and individuals are prone to skip over. But what you should have are two pieces of paper now, literally two pieces of paper. And on one, there is a statement of what the problems and opportunities are. On the other is a simple statement of your objectives and constraints. These frame the decision-making context for you. If you can meet your objectives, if you avoid the constraints, then you will solve the problems, you will attain the opportunities. Once your risk management process gets down to the problem solving, the very best risk management option is the one that does the most to accomplish your objectives while avoiding your constraints. So if you do a good job in defining this decision context with these two pieces of paper, that's going to give you your basis for making a good objective decision. So the written objectives and constraints are an indispensable guide to good risk management. Let's summarize by repeating a couple of simple points. Objectives and constraints define what successful risk management looks like. Objectives are what you will try to do. Constraints are what you will try not to do.